Jamaica. Make we do the right thing. Make we live good today for a better tomorrow. Talk it out. Don't fight it out. The time by the Ministry of National Security is
6:30.
The U.S. President Joe Biden has unveiled a new immigration policy that sets out a clear path to citizenship for hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants in the United States who are married to a U.S. citizen. The questions emerge: why this policy change at this time? And even more importantly, what are the implications for the thousands of Jamaicans in the United States forced to live and work in the shadows in constant fear of immigration officials who are hunting them down, looking to turf them out of the country? That's the subject for discussion today on Lead Story. Let's start the show. Welcome to Lead Story here on CVM TV on this Wednesday evening. My name is George Davis. So yes, the big news making the rounds on Tuesday was that announcement by the Biden administration that the U.S. president was going to make a massive change to the country's immigration policy, creating a pathway for illegal immigrants who are married to a U.S. citizen to have a clear, unencumbered pathway, well, unencumbered in some respects, pathway to U.S. citizenship. And he said that this is intended to ensure that those who have no criminal records and otherwise would have had a very difficult situation getting that citizenship, maintaining their family structure, maintaining their place in their family structure, and keeping their jobs, would not have to use or take the arduous route to U.S. citizenship. That was the reality before this announcement. This new policy set to take effect at the end of the month, and so we're just looking at the implications for those migrants who it is said to benefit, especially the Jamaicans. And many of you, well, everybody in Jamaica knows somebody who is in the United States and are not straight. We want to find out how this avenue could help them to get the papers that make them legally able to live and work in the United States. Before we do that, though, we have a nugget to set up the discussion today, prepared by Jonathan Atkins and voiced by Curlin Brown.
Immigration, one of the most provocative words in political discourse across the world. Immigration policies can make governments and shut the door for electoral return on some. It presents a fine line for governments to walk, as it requires complex considerations of economies, foreign relations, and domestic and political realities.
You know, when they I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country. When they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done.
So why does the word invoke so much controversy? Well, people get jittery when foreigners enter their countries in droves. The U.S. is no different. It's an election year, and immigration and border security rank consistently in the top 3 issues for American voters, according to most major polls. Neck and neck in the polls with Donald Trump. Just this week, President Joe Biden decided to up the ante. By way of executive order, President Biden announced undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens living in the U.S. will be given legal status or stay in the United States, a policy expected to directly impact 500,000 spouses. As sure as the policy is to impact those undocumented spouses, it's equally assured by impact his campaign for a second term as POTUS. This policy amends the previous requirements for spouses to leave the U.S. if found to be undocumented and seek legal status from the embassy or consulate in their home country.
About keeping couples together who are married, where one spouse is a U.S. citizen, the other is undocumented. They've been living in the United States for at least 10 years. These couples have been raising families, sending their kids to church and school, paying taxes, contributing to our country for 10 years or more. Matter of fact, the average time they've spent here is 23 years. People were affected today. But living in the United States all this time, with this fear and uncertainty. We can fix that, and that's what I'm going to do today. Fix it.
Undocumented workers, well, they also now have the opportunity to get regularized once they have a college degree and an employer who is willing to vouch for them to be granted a work permit. With the U.S. playing host to Jamaica's largest diaspora, the new immigration is sure to directly impact Jamaicans. So will this policy be the gateway to more Jamaicans given the green light to go for love and a green card to live? As for Biden, only the election in November will decide if his election policies have received the green light or a red card from the electorate.
Yep, immigration policy in an election year. There has to be an obvious relationship between the measure and that massive event in the first Tuesday in November. To discuss this issue with me this evening, I'm turning to Siku Clark, founder of the Siku Clark Law Group based in Orlando, Florida, and Xavier Francis. He's the founder and managing attorney at Francis Law in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, welcome to Lead Story. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
All right, good. All right, Siku, let me start with you. The obvious, well, not even the obvious thing. Let me take it another way. I had formulated an opening question in my mind, but I've just shifted that aside in exchange for this one. Just what is Joe Biden looking to cure by the change he announced on Tuesday?
Well, I mean, he is essentially trying to portray uniting families, right? Because what this executive order does, it shows that to the immigrant base that, hey, we are here for you. This bill, this executive order, it's going to affect over 500,000 families. So if you have over 500,000 families that can now be united, that can now live and work and be together and continue to pursue the American dream, that's another constituents, another set of people that he could potentially have on his ballot.
And Xavier Francis, people would look on and say, well, it's not as if people of the kind that are set to benefit from this policy change are being hunted down in droves by immigration officials to start with, because as Biden says, for those who are there 20 years or more or 10 years or more who are married to a U.S. citizen, those aren't the ones that ICE usually trawls for through the various workplaces and spaces in the United States. They are immigrants of another profile that are usually looking to be stuck in that immigration dragnet. So with that as the case, why is he doing this for this group of people with 10 years or more residency in the U.S. married to an American citizen?
Yeah, so, this is the one of the biggest immigration policy changes since DACA in 2012, and we're actually at the 12-year anniversary of DACA. And I think this is sort of intended to help family members who have been stuck in this immigration limbo to get out of that top part and finally adjust their status to permanent residency and eventually find a clear pathway to citizenship. So, these are members who contribute in various ways. And, we also have to keep in mind that this is a retroactive policy. So, it applies to situations and actions that occurred in the past. And, from a policy standpoint, it just makes sense to provide some type of relief to these individuals who are, in the U.S., who have been here for at least 10 years and married to a U.S. citizen, to just find a pathway to permanent residency in the U.S.
Right. Siku, I don't imagine this is a clear run to citizenship. There are obviously hurdles that have to be cleared by those seeking to utilize the avenue of this new policy. Walk my viewers through what will happen now. So the program opens by the end of the month. This policy takes effect, and somebody wants to utilize the portal that's now created. What will they have to do? Who qualifies?
Well, the memorandum was very clear, and it says it will be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. So, of course, the obvious, it is one, you have to be married to a United States citizen. You have to have resided in the U.S. for 10 years. But the issue that a lot of people may be confused on is you have to have had an illegal entry, an uninspected entry. So there are a lot of people who think, oh, I'm here in the U.S. and I'm married to a United States citizen. I have this pathway. No, it is for people who had an uninspected illegal entry. So they have, after this program goes into effect, they would be able to apply. They'd have 3 years in which they could apply for a green card. However, as I said, it's a case-by-case basis. So the background would be assessed. Is there a criminal history? Is there anything that makes this person inadmissible? So a case-by-case basis.
What do you mean by uninspected entry, Sekou? Just for the benefit of those who aren't familiar with that kind of language. And how does it differ from any other kind of entry?
Okay, so an uninspected entry is someone that enters the United States across the border or undetected. So without an actual stamp in their passport that, hey, you were inspected by Border Patrol. So typically the people who cross the border would have an uninspected entry.
So John Tom from Maypen, who flew to the US, landed, got his stamp to say that he was landed, was given 3 weeks in the country. 10 years later, he's still there. 13 years later, he's still there. Married to an American. This does not apply to him?
No, this does not apply to him.
Oh.
Correct.
Oh,
Yeah,
is that you think a shortcoming of this policy, or do you think it will still help a lot, given that there are perhaps a large number of Jamaicans in the USA who came through the uninspected portal that you just outlined?
Yeah, so I mean, it will affect over 500,000 people, a lot of Jamaicans, because the thing is, generally speaking, if you cross the border and have an uninspected entry, right, and even if you get married to a United States citizen, generally you cannot adjust your status and you would have to leave your country and then face being subject to a 10-year bar. So this is huge for people who cross the border. They're married to a United States citizen, but they're stuck because they don't want to leave the country and potentially be exposed to a 10-year bar. Or 5-year bar.
Xavier, there are many people who are looking at this and trying to get a window into, well, get information from both of you guys so they could pass on to someone in the United States, trying to explain to them the effect of this. So someone comes to you and says they've heard of this and they want to know if they're eligible. They want you to guide them through the process. Give me an idea of what that conversation will entail as you try to counsel someone who's looking to make use of this policy shift by the Biden administration.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, it's still so early in this stage. And, you know, just to sort of talk about advanced points, you know, there are a couple of other obstacles that we have to consider as well. First thing is the upcoming presidential election in November. And if the administration were to change, then it's possible that policy could be, you know, upended. The next challenge that we're facing resides with the courts, and it's possible that it might also be go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And right now we have a conservative majority, so you know that might present some change. Well, the third hurdle resides with policy execution implementation. So this is going to have to be delegated to the Department of Homeland Security. And that agency is going to have to determine, you know, how to apply, how much to pay, you know, what forms to fill out, and all the logistical details that we really don't have, you know, access to at this point. So at this point in time, we need to continue monitoring the situation within the weeks and months ahead to see how it develops in more detail.
Hear you on that. Let's take the break, gentlemen. We're on Lead Story here on CVM TV, talking about Joe Biden's new immigration policy, speaking with two Jamaican attorneys who are doing very well for themselves in the United States, getting their perspective very early in the piece on what the implications of this policy change are. More after the break.
I am death.
You know what? Never change.
ward off death. Obey the road code. A message from the Road Safety Unit in the Island Traffic Authority.
The time by Grace. Taste that moves you is
6:45.
no more fear of missing out. CVM TV News is on YouTube. Get up-to-date news, sports, and business content at CVM TV News anytime, anywhere. Subscribe now to CVM TV News to see it happen.
Book the date. Mark your calendar. It's a start to the Copa America like no other. Witness the likes of Messi, Julian Alvarez, and Emi Martinez as the reigning world and Copa America champions Argentina come face-to-face with CONCACAF hopefuls Canada. Live Thursday, the 20th of June at 7 p.m. See it happen on CVM TV. Copa America 2024 brought to you by
KFC, J-Ray and Nephew, Courts, Sunshine Snacks.
Welcome back to Lead Story here on CVM, talking about Joe Biden's new immigration policy. It's an election year, November. First Tuesday is going to be real competitive as Biden appears to go forward to face the presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump. Immigration, one of the key issues. Poll upon poll in the United States show that Americans have strong feelings about the issue of immigration, and both leading men on either side of the political divide have different views and sharply differing views on immigration. Biden prescribing something he believes will find favor with the majority of Americans and will be reflected in the ballot, with him getting a second term in office. I'm speaking with Siku Clark, founder of the Siku Clark Law Group in Orlando, Florida, and Xavier Francis, founder of, well, he's based out of Washington, D.C., and he is an immigration attorney as well. Xavier, before the break, you were talking about the fact that given that what Biden is proposing to do is by executive order, it runs the risk of being changed if the administration changes in November, and of course by any challenge that may be launched through the Supreme Court. Based on how things stand and with immigration, a deeply divisive issue, do you anticipate legal challenges to what the president has set down on paper?
Yeah, it is very possible will be on that the instead not Congress.
No. Hold on, Xavier. We've had a challenge with your order. Let's see if we can correct that. And come back to you. Siku, in the meantime, I want to ask you, the DACA Act, one of you mentioned it earlier, and we can look at what DACA said, what DACA set down in 2012, the Obama administration by executive order, putting something in place for what they called dreamers, and the DACA Act, as we have it now, it says...
Yeah, so the DACA Act, well, coincidentally, it's on its 12-year anniversary. So this executive order is very timely.
Continue, Mr. Clark. Continue, Mr.
Yeah, so it's very timely for Dreamers, because if most people don't know, the Dreamers, it's very temporary. So these people who enter the country uninspected or when they were a child, right? Up to this point, there is not a clear way for a green card or citizenship. So what Biden has done, he has now created a pathway for them now to transition to actually work visas, such as the EB1, the E2, which is typically put aside for specialized immigrants, which eventually it would create a path for a green card.
Right. So my question was, I was waiting on the graphic to come to pivot from that, but my question was how the DACA Act complements, if at all, what this other aspect of the immigration policy is setting out to do. Is there any congruence between both, or is there some dissonance as you see it?
No, I would definitely think that they do align, because the dreamers, right? The typical dreamer is a child that entered uninspected, right? And this is now creating a pathway for them to potentially adjust their status, which is typically challenging if you have an uninspected entry.
Right. Okay. So there's alignment there, and that's the key thing. I want to ask you, Siku. Well, Xavier, are you hearing us better?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better. It's much better.
Point about the executive order and some of the considerations there. So, it could be challenging the courts on the basis that it is executive authority, and the argument would be that this should have been an act of Congress. Now, given the current political climate, it's unlikely that Congress would have passed such a law. But if this does go up to the Supreme Court, I think that will be one of the main arguments that we see. And, I think it's very possible that we'll see legal challenges within the coming days and weeks ahead.
And given what Siku said earlier about the Department of Homeland Security having the burden of processing these applications on a case-by-case basis. So with that as a reality, with the likely legal challenges to come, Xavier Francis, could the reality happen where, based on the problems and the legal challenges attendant to this new immigration policy, the policy could be so bogged down that nobody benefits from it in the short term?
Yes, that's possible. Sure. The Department of Homeland Security is currently overwhelmed with a high volume of immigration petitions, and I'm sure Siku is aware of this, but we've been seeing extended processing times for a lot of different petitions with USCIS. So, whenever the government tries to enact a new order and it gets delegated to these agencies, there is a buffer time that is required to see it actually, from executed and implemented in detail. And the chances of that, materializing before or by November 2024 just seems unlikely.
Yeah. All right. Siku, we spoke of alignment earlier, DACA Act, and now this new immigration policy. Continuing on the line of alignment, what Biden announced earlier on this month insofar as his policy having to do with southern immigration across the border with Mexico, and the tough stance he has taken against that. Is this new immigration policy designed to balance out the harsh effects of that southern migration policy, where he has cut off effectively people from seeking asylum coming over the southern border, and he's trying to curry favor with voters in a way, given that they were angered by what they did with the policy attending to migrants coming across the southern border with Mexico?
I can definitely agree with that point, because to Xavier's point earlier, the new asylum changes that Biden implemented, they are now being challenged in court. A lot of staunch Democrats, a lot of staunch immigration supporters were extremely disappointed with the asylum changes that he made, and said that they're unconstitutional and not in line with the U.S. rhetoric of taking people in who are suffering persecution. So I strongly believe that he definitely had to balance it out to say, okay, all right, let me now appease a certain subset of immigrants that will kind of balance the scales, if you will.
Yeah. Xavier, I have a graphic up which shows the points along which asylum requests are usually processed: the race, religion, nationality, membership of particular social group, political opinion, and so forth. With this new policy, which of course will also take in your criminal record in the United States, will these things figure prominently in the assessment that the Department of Homeland Security will make as it processes applications case by case?
Well, a good point. It's so uncertain at this point, and I'm not able to sort of speak on that, precisely at this time. I do agree with Sekou that the asylum changes that Biden implemented were met with great distaste by some members of the left, and maybe this is his effort to rebalance some favor with the upside. But right now the situation at the borders is so complicated and complex that it requires it requires a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
And for sure.
So Siku, are we united in saying that the effect of the announcement will have greater impact than the announcement itself? Because if and when this thing is taken to court, Joe Biden can always say, well, look at what I'm trying to do for you, and look at my political rivals trying to stop me from doing this thing for you. Do you see it boiling down to that?
Exactly, 100%. Plus, if I'm sure you remember, one of the biggest things that Joe Biden campaigned on was uniting families and resolving, or try to have some type of resolve to the immigration crisis. And I mean, he has been consistent with that, but this was the major hammer. Like, he really dropped the hammer with this one huge sweeping change. So, it's time for the re-election. So no one can say, "Hey, you campaigned on one thing and did not live up to it." He's now telling the people that, "Look, I did what I said that I was going to do."
Yeah. And what does this mean? Well, Xavier asked a question earlier. I'm not sure I got the answer I was looking for. So I'm going to put the question again because I think it's important. For those Jamaicans especially, who are married to an American, but they themselves are not legally, they shouldn't be in the U.S. because they're illegal migrants. But they've been there in the U.S. for 10 or more years, married to an American citizen, and that's their status. Are they the ones that immigration, that ICE agents are rounding up, or are those being rounded up of a totally different profile from those this Biden policy is aiming to help? Xavier, I'm putting that one.
Xavier, you wanted to? Yeah.
Oh yes. So that's complicated to answer. I think that the policy is. I think the policy is aiming to reunify families, and I don't believe that ICE is pretty much set out and targeting undocumented married spouses of U.S. citizens. These people are sort of scattered across the country, and it's not really easy to target and pinpoint where these individuals are located, as opposed to the southern border where there's a clear influx of migrants entering at certain key points. So with regards to